Union Pacific 4014 is an icon of steam railroading technology. A monster of a locomotive, it is only 100 feet shorter than a Boeing 747. 4014 has drawn the attention of dozens of rail fans and the general public. In this video, we will be covering the amazing history of the Union Pacific 4014. Why do you need a locomotive so big and powerful at all? By the end of World War I, American railroads were unprepared for the vast quantities of freight that they needed to haul. The locomotives were not powerful enough to haul these longer trains on their own. Locomotives would have to double head in order to compensate for the problem. The days of hauling heavy loads at low speeds were gone by this point. The aim of the game was faster, not more tonnage. The UP 9000 was the most powerful machine and the largest single-unit locomotive of its time. But there was a problem. Although the 412-2 wheel arrangement was fine for the open plains, where the curves were gentle, the same could not be said for the mountainous parts of the UP system, such as the Wasatch Mountains in Wyoming and Utah and the infamous Sherman Hill. So the Challenger was designed by UP's Motive Power Department. The Challenger was an articulated locomotive, meaning that the locomotive's frame was divided into two, and had them joined by a hinge pin in the middle. This helped the Challenger cope with tight curves. However, by World War II, the Union Pacific would have to haul even more goods and supplies for the war effort, so the railroad decided to stretch the Challenger to its limit. In August of 1941, the first Wasatch locomotive was delivered to the Union Pacific. The locomotive was one of the largest locomotives in the world, and among the most powerful. 25 of these locomotives would be built for the Union Pacific. However, an Alco worker took some chalk and wrote "Big Boy" on the boiler. The name stuck. Each of these locomotives would cost $5.7 million adjusted for inflation. One of those big boys is the UP 4014, aka UP's PR machine. 4014 was built by Alco in November of 1941, and she was delivered to Union Pacific in December. She would be placed into revenue service on April 2nd, 1943. During a test, 4014 pulled 65 freight cars by herself between Ogden, Utah, and Evanston, Wyoming. During this, 4014 generated a staggering 5,530 horsepower. 4014 would have a relatively uneventful and successful service career. However, when World War II ended, the big boy was threatened by a new type of locomotive. The diesel-electric locomotive was much more efficient than steam locomotives. Even the F units could be coupled together to match the power of the big boy if needed. But 4014 would hold on until July 21st, 1959, when she did her last revenue run. 4014 would be kept in storage for 2 years. She was officially retired on December 7th, 1961. And her sisters were retired by 1962. Out of 25 big boys, 8 remain today, with 4014 being the only one operational. 4014 will be sent to the Southern California chapter of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society in Pomona, California. 4014 would sit on static display for years. She was taken care of to the best ability of the Railroad Historical Society. The idea that a big boy would enter excursion service was considered unlikely. Their sheer size would make them incompatible with some rail lines, especially on the East Coast. But in 2012, everyone was shocked when Union Pacific officials announced that they intended to reacquire one of their big boys and restore it to operation for excursions. Union Pacific has had a steam program since 1960. It would take some time to evaluate the state of the 8 surviving big boys, to see which one was the most feasible to restore. And on July 23, 2013, Union Pacific announced that 4014 was the locomotive that was going to be restored. The Historical Society agreed to give 4014 back to the Union Pacific. On November 14, 2013, 4014 began her journey to the UP Steam Shop in Cheyenne. She had to be moved from her spot at the museum on a temporary line through an adjacent parking lot. On January 26, 2014, 4014 was pulled from the Los Angeles County Fairplex to the Cavanina station on Metrolink tracks. She arrived at West Colton Yard in Bloomington, where she sat on display until April 28th, where she began her journey to Cheyenne. She arrived at the steam shop's roundhouse on May 8th. When she got there, 4014 was immediately restored, The UP steam team would have to overhaul 844 at this time, which was already a giant undertaking. They didn't have the manpower to do both projects, so they focused on 844. Because they had been working on 844 for a while, and they knew what it needed, so 4014 just sat around in the shop for 2 years. But UP did use the time to expand and upgrade their shops to handle a monster of a locomotive. In August of 2016, UP finally announced that work on restoring 4014 had finally begun. Under Ed Dickens, the Heritage Fleet Operations Director, she would be completely disassembled by early 2017, and they predictably had to fabricate a few neat parts for 4014. Those parts included the rod brasses, top boiler check valve, and lubricator check valves. The driving wheels would be sent to the Strasburg Railroad in Pennsylvania, who took the time to repair them. As part of the process, it was decided to convert 4014 from coal burning to oil, number 5 for oil to be specific. They did this by replacing her grates in the firebox with a fire pan, as well as an oil burner. It was reported that 4014 was being put back together in March of 2018, and 10 months later, a restoration was nearly completed. On May 1st, 2019, 4014 moved under her own power for the first time in almost 6 decades. The next day, she made her test run from Cheyenne to Nunn, Colorado. 4014 would join 844 in excursion service and earn the title of the world's largest operational steam locomotive. Her first excursion run happened in May of 2019, amid celebrations that marked 150 years since the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. Following her May 4th christening at the Cheyenne Depot, 4014 double-headed with 844 and traveled over to Ogden, Utah. 4014 would then make 2 tours on her own. From July 8th to August 8th, she visited the Midwest, places like St. Paul, Union Depot, and the Lake Superior Museum. Then she toured the southwestern United States from December 27th to November 26th. But the pandemic ruined everything, and the railroad announced that steam operations with 4014 and 844 will be canceled for the year. Luckily, excursion service did resume in August and September 2021, with 4014 doing tour stops in Fort Worth and Houston, New Orleans, Little Rock, St. Louis, and Denver. In May of 2022, the Railroading Heritage of Midwest America in Silvis, Illinois, wanted to rebuild 4014's original tender to carry fuel instead of coal. Because she wasn't using her original tender at the time, 4014 was using 3985's tender, which had already been modified to carry oil. 3985 was being put back together back then, and they would simply like her tender, so they planned to fix 4014's so they could just trade them. July of 2022, 4014 pulled the museum special excursion between Cheyenne and Denver Union Station. On September 14th, 2022, she was fired up to move B5511 out of the Cheyenne Roundhouse and around the yard for testing. 5511 was also given to the Railroading Heritage of Midwest America in order to be brought back up to steam. In June of 2023, 4014 ran from Cheyenne to Omaha as part of the Home Run Express Tour, then sat on display at the Charles Schwab Field in Omaha on June 15th and 21st, as well as the 24th and 25th. During this time, 4014 did something awesome to rail fans. A problem came up because of a stalled freight train that while 4014 was on her way back to Cheyenne on June 29th, so the dispatcher decided that, hey, big boys, right here, and can certainly help push this. So, she did. She banged the freight train up the grade in Blair. On July 3rd, 2 cab rides were sold for a journey from Pine Bluffs to Wyoming. The price was $9,500 per ticket. Bro, do you have to do something like that? You don't have to charge $9,500. Not everyone can set aside that much money, but it was to benefit the Pacific Road Museum. 4014 actually can be considered one of the safest steam locomotives in operation today, thanks to PTC or Positive Train Control, which isn't really a dig on steam locomotives because it was designed in the diesel era and is a pretty new system. Going as far back as December 2018, UP was thinking about this when they asked the FRA if they could have an exemption for 4014 and 844 from the new PTC requirements. In February 2019, the FRA replied and said that 4014 didn't need to have PTC because it was a steam locomotive, and pointed out in this case you don't need to ask or have any waivers, because this was heritage equipment. The new rules did factor in the fact that heritage equipment still runs, and you can't usually modify locomotives to have PTC. In 2021, 4014 would become the first mainline steam locomotive ever to utilize PTC, but at the time the system used the displays and equipment in her helper diesel locomotive numbered 4014, correction 4015. But in May of 2024, they moved the equipment into a cabinet in her tender throughout 4014 to run without the assistance of a diesel helper. In 2024, 4014 did two tours, the Heartland of America tour and the Westward Bound tour. On June 30th, 2024, the Westward Bound tour started. She scheduled a stop in Roseville on July 12th and 13th, and Ogden, Utah on July 20th and the 21st. Actually, that's where I saw the Big Boy in. 4014 continues the legacy of the Big Boy class. She is a fan favorite among rail fans, including me. She will probably be forever known as one of the largest steam locomotives in operation. While she isn't the largest to be built, she's definitely up there. Anyways, thanks for watching this video on Union Pacific 4014. This one was very fun to make. Like I said, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and support me on Patreon.